seat, please. We're about to get started.
Any updates?
All right.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Ronnie. If you don't know me, I'm the Israel Fellow for Hila. So we're very happy to have you here. Enjoy.
Thank you all for coming tonight. It's a privilege that we can host these distinguished guests from Washington, D.C. We are excited to present new perspectives, and we encourage discussion. Question and answer session will be left for the end, so please write any questions on the note cards you have, and there are extras available if you need them. And then someone will be coming around to collect them, and we'll address those questions at the end of the discussion. David Makovsky is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute and Director of the Project on the Middle East Peace Process. He is also an adjunct professor in Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University's Paul H. Neitz School of Advanced International Studies. In 2013-2014, he worked in the office of the U.S. Secretary of State, serving as a senior advisor to the Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Author of numerous Washington Institute monographs and essays on issues related to the Middle East peace process and the Arab-Israeli conflict, he is also co-author with Dennis Ross of the 2009 Washington Post bestseller, Myths, Illusions, and Peace, Finding a New Direction for America in the Middle East. His 2011 maps on alternative territorial solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were reprinted by the New York Times in the paper's first interactive treatment of an op-ed. His widely acclaimed September 2012 New Yorker essay, The Silent Strike, focused on the U.S.-Israel dynamics leading up to the 2007 Israeli attack on Syrian nuclear facilities. In the last several years, he has made over 120 visits to American college campuses to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He has done a TED Talk on the issue for the college audience. Before joining the Washington Institute, Mr. Makovsky was an award-winning journalist who covered the peace process from 1989 to 2000. He is the former executive editor of the Jerusalem Post, was diplomatic correspondent for Israel's leading daily Haaretz, and is a former contributing editor to U.S. News and World Report. He served for 11 years as that magazine's special Jerusalem correspondent. He was awarded the National Press Club's 1994 Edwin M. Hood Award for Diplomatic Correspondence for a cover story on PLO finances that he co-wrote for the magazine. A native of St. Louis, Missouri, Mr. Makovsky received a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a master's degree in Middle East Studies from Harvard University.
Ghaith Al-Omari, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute, is a former executive director of the American Task Force on Palestine. Previously, he served in various positions within the Palestinian Authority, including director of the International Relationship Department in the Office of the Palestinian President, and advisor to former Prime Minister Mohammed Abbas. In these capacities, he provided advice on foreign policy, especially in the United States and Israel, and security. He has extensive experience in the Palestinian-Israeli peace process and has been an advisor for the Palestinian negotiating team throughout the permanent status negotiations. In that capacity, he participated in various negotiation rounds, most notably the Camp David Summit and the Tabat talks. After the breakdown of the Palestinian-Israel negotiations, he was the lead Palestinian drafter of the Geneva Initiative, an unofficial model peace agreement negotiated between leading Palestinian and Israeli public figures. Mr. Al-Omari is a lawyer by trade and graduate of Georgetown and Oxford universities. Prior to his involvement in the Middle East peace process, he taught international law in Jordan and was active in human rights advocacy.
All right, let's start the timer. Thank you very much, first to Hilal for having us over, and for you all for being here. By the way, I'm Ghaith, he's David, just in case you confuse us. The way we do it, I think I'm gonna start with a general overview, and maybe David can dig deeper into some of the issues I'm gonna touch on, and hope to leave some time for the questions and answers. And let me start with a very general statement. And this statement, I would say that there is no solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict except for the two-state solution. And this is a lesson that we, Palestinians and Israelis, and the international community, have frankly learned the hard way. I'm old enough to remember, I look at the room, most of you are not, but I certainly am old enough to remember when we tried everything else. We as Palestinians tried to deny Israel's existence. I remember growing up, using the word Israel was not permitted. In my native country of Jordan, we have talked about the Zionist entity, the Zionist enemy, etc., etc. I remember the times of where terror was the main tool that Palestinians have tried to use, and that failed. And the Israelis were no much better. We all remember, I remember, many of you have read of Golda Meir saying there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, denying the very existence of the Palestinian people. We remember Itzhak Rabin during the Intifada trying to, using the policy of breaking the bones. Yet, what we learned the hard way after a lot of bloodshed, or after a lot of failures is, both peoples are there to stay. And therefore, in the early 90s, when Arafat and Rabin decided to go for a two-state approach, it was not that one day they woke up and like Chuck's epiphany, we got it wrong all along. It was bitter experience and a realization that there's no way but to split the land. And in some ways, this realization, in retrospect, is very obvious. Because this conflict, at the end of the day, is about two national movements, two nationalisms, wanting to realize their aspirations through the creation of a state of their own. One has succeeded, that's Zionism, created its own state, Israel, homeland of the Jewish people, and the Palestinian national movement that still aspires to create a Palestinian homeland through the creation of the state of Palestine. If it's no two-state solution, then there's no solution. This continuation of the status quo and of occupation is a sure recipe to continue what we've had since 1967, on and off confrontation, sometimes violent, sometimes not, but a constant state of violence. And the one-state delusion, I don't look at it as a solution, is simply impractical. This new state, will it be Jewish, will it be Palestinian, will it speak Hebrew, will it speak Arabic? Will the national anthem be Hatikva, will it be Fidai? At the end of the day, if we look at the one-state idea, it's a recipe for creating or transforming what is now a conflict, international conflict, into a civil war. So at the end of the day, it's really only a two-state solution that can get both peoples their legitimate aspirations of getting a realization of their national movement, their self-determination through the creation of states of their own. Now this is the good news. Actually, this is part of the good news. I would go even a bit further and say we've gone beyond, in the early 90s we have concluded that a two-state solution is the way to go forward. Now we've gone beyond that. And we have a very good sense of what a two-state solution would look like. We have a good sense of what are the core decisions that leaders on both sides will have to make this two-state solution a reality. And to be honest, this is something that we might take for granted, and I know that David's going to go into more depth on some of these issues. But I remember very well, this is different when I was a negotiator in the late 90s, early 2000s, when David was a negotiator just a few years ago. When I was a negotiator, I would walk into a negotiating room, put on some ideas on the table, not really knowing how the Israelis are going to react to it. We were testing, and they were testing. I would hear their response, go back to my office, tweak it. They would hear our response, go to their offices, tweak it. We had no real sense of what are the red lines, what are the interests, what are the concerns of both sides. Today, we know them. There are many books written. Bill Clinton produced a set of ideas that we see as the basis for a two-state solution. Memoirs were written. WikiLeaks has put out a lot of the content of the conversations that we were having in private. Right now, we know what the solution looks like. What we need is decisions. And this is where the good news ends and the bad news starts. Because reaching peace is not only about identifying what a solution looks like, it's also having leaders and politics in both sides that enable reaching these kind of solutions. A two-state solution, for example, would require Israel to divide Jerusalem, would require the Palestinians to give up on the exercise of the right of return, and these are very difficult decisions to be made. And to make these kind of difficult decisions, you need leaders who have both, first of all, of course, the will, but also the political capacity to reach these kind of solutions. And this is where the picture is pretty grim. I will not spend too much time on Israel. I'm not the expert. David is. I don't know if we're going to touch on it, but certainly on the Israeli side, enough to say that in the current cabinet, the majority are explicitly against a two-state solution. A minority is for a two-state solution, but it's a small minority and a very hesitant minority. So in today's Israeli political system, it's very hard for any prime minister to make these kinds of decisions and have his coalition survive. On the Palestinian side, we have a deep, chronic problem as well in Palestinian politics. The most obvious is the split between Hamas and Fatah, West Bank and Gaza. I will not go too much in depth into it, of course in the Q&A, very happy to address it. Enough to say that after 10 years of failed reconciliation attempts, reconciliation is not going to happen anytime soon. So we have a very deeply divided Palestinian polity. But that's only the obvious part of the problems. There's a deeper part of the problem. If you look at the West Bank, the PLO, you see a Palestinian president who's now serving, I believe, the 13th or 14th year of a 4-year term. No electoral legitimacy. The same, by the way, with the parliament. I think they're 1 year younger than the president, but certainly no one has electoral legitimacy. And beyond that, if you look at the opinion polls, around 2/3 of the Palestinians want Abbas, the Palestinian president, to resign. 80% of the Palestinians think their government is corrupt. Think of it. 4 out of 5 Palestinians that you will meet think they're governed by thieves. Under these kinds of circumstances, it's very hard to imagine how a Palestinian leader can make some of these decisions that are core, that are key, that go to the very basic, to the very heart of the Palestinian narrative. Right now, on both sides, we do not have leaders who are willing, capable, interested, put whatever adjective you want, in reaching this peace deal. What do we do when only a two-state solution is possible, yet the reality today that the politics makes it very difficult to reach this two-state solution? Actually, this is not time, in my view, for conflict resolution. This is time for conflict management. But conflict management can take many forms. Some forms are just basically maintaining the status quo. Other forms, which I would advocate, are ones that will actually move us closer towards ultimately a two-state solution, start setting the political scene to a point where we can get a two-state solution. And if you look at the kind of management that we could talk about, clearly, at least from the Palestinian perspective, there are two different arenas. There is Gaza, and there is the West Bank, and they require two different approaches. I'll spend most of my time on the West Bank. I will not go in depth into the current clashes in Gaza, though of course happy to address them in the Q&A. But in Gaza, the situation right now is such, because Gaza is governed by Hamas, an organization that does not believe in a two-state solution, that still is committed to using terror to reach its objectives. It's very hard to see how one can engage in a positive way with the governing structure. So in a sense, playing politics with Hamas right now is not possible. Now that said, Gaza is not Hamas. Gaza is around 2 million people, give or take. Most of them are not supporters of Hamas. Most of them are just regular civilians who want to live. And the current situation in Gaza is unconscionable. If you look at the level of unemployment, I believe it has reached 50%. Not sure of the statistic, but I believe something along these lines. Electricity 4 hours a day. Drinking water is hardly available. And so it's really a situation where, from a humanitarian point of view, is unconscionable. And because of this, what we see is a lot of anger, a lot of discontent, and a lot of despair in Gaza. This manifests itself in many ways, none of which are conducive to stability. So for Gaza right now, what we need at the most immediate level is humanitarian relief. Dealing with some of these humanitarian issues to ensure that the people at least live the minimum of a dignified life, which they don't have right now. Now, in a perfect world, at least in a good world, aid to Gaza, because it can't go through Hamas, should go through the Palestinian Authority. Yet what we have seen recently, that the Palestinian Authority itself is not interested in playing this role. The Egyptians have been shepherding the reconciliation process. Hamas, because it felt cornered, because it felt that its governing of Gaza has failed, was willing to, move a few inches. Not enough, not the whole way. They're still insisting on keeping their weapons and their militias, but we're willing to move a little bit. The PA, President Abbas, has basically said, I'm not interested. put some very difficult conditions. And so now we're in a situation where I believe the world has to go to the Palestinians and go to Abbas himself and say, either be a partner or we will bypass you. The situation in Gaza today is such that it's not time for politics. It's not time for political games. There is need for immediate relief, and of course, if that decision is there, Israel has its own role to play by facilitating the delivery of aid and reconstruction into Gaza. So for Gaza right now, there is an immediate concern, and that is the concern of reconstruction and providing, or humanitarian, and providing the minimum dignified life that people deserve. The West Bank provides more of a space, not only for maintenance, but also for progress, for doing things on the ground that actually could get us closer to realizing peace and could start dealing with one of the core issues that are plaguing both Palestinians and Israelis, which is the issue of mutual mistrust. And I will get back to that in a second. Now, when you look at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, those of you who follow it, what makes the headlines usually is the mutual accusations, going to the UN, fiery speeches, scoring of points, pointing of fingers, all of these kind of things. It looks very adversarial on the face of it, and of course in many ways it is. Yet what often goes below the radar screen, what often goes unreported and undetected by those in the outside world, is the fact that despite all of this, in the midst of all of these political and diplomatic wranglings, there is a level of security cooperation that we're seeing between the two sides that is unprecedented. And that security cooperation meets the interests of both sides. For Israel, it meets the interest and the need for fighting terrorism, and for the Palestinian Authority, it meets the interest of ensuring law and order in its own, in areas under its own control, and moving beyond the state of lawlessness that we saw during the years of the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. Both sides are benefiting from this security cooperation, and it's creating a fascinating dynamic. A dynamic where, at least between the security establishments, on the Palestinian side and certainly on the Israeli side, there's a sense of partnership. So much so that today, the IDF, the Israeli military, Shin Bet, Israeli CT, counterterrorism organizations, are actually the biggest advocates for Palestinian interests within the Israeli establishment. Because they feel, on the other side, they have partners they can work with. And what you often see, because of the stable security situation in the West Bank, that the Israeli military, the Israeli security establishment, is actually very open, and more than open, proactive in suggesting a lot of ideas, a lot of projects on the ground that will both benefit the Palestinians economically, but also will allow the PA, the Palestinian Authority, to exert its jurisdiction, its rule, beyond what it exerts right now. To put it again, to restate the point, the Israeli military and security feel that there is a chance, there is a possibility right now to give the Palestinians more access in the West Bank, more areas of their control, more economic opportunities, because they feel that there is partnership there. This dynamic, however, on both sides ends up facing political realities. And the political reality in Israel right now is you have a coalition that many of whose members are not interested in being seen as doing good things for the Palestinians. It doesn't really politically sell. And on the Palestinian side, particularly at a time where President Abbas, who's beyond being on his 13 years of 4-year term, he's in his 80s, I think 83 recently, a smoker, does not live a terribly healthy lifestyle, let's put it this way. He's going to leave this scene soon. It's a succession dynamic, and no one in a succession dynamic wants to seem soft on the other side. So you see a lot of rhetoric coming from Palestinian politicians, which also undermines the security cooperation. The challenge right now is how can we take this security cooperation, build on it, and ensure that the Palestinians start seeing a direct dividend, not only in a security point of view, but from an economic and a territorial point of view, so that they can start having some hope for the future. Now, this kind of thing, economic, additional, adding some jurisdictions to the PA, these things are not going to resolve the conflict. To resolve the conflict, you need negotiations. Issues like Jerusalem, like refugees, like borders cannot simply be dealt with by these incremental issues. So ultimately, of course, a two-state solution needs diplomacy. But doing some of these small things can actually start changing some of the public perception that we see. If you ask most Palestinians, they will tell you, we want peace. It's the Israelis who don't want it. And frankly, Palestinians' daily experience reinforces this. Because for Palestinians, most of the times that they engage with Israelis, for most Palestinians, it's as soldiers at checkpoints, it's in these kind of circumstances. And as someone who has to go through this, had to go through this, I can tell you it doesn't really make you like the other side. It's not a particularly pleasant experience. And of course, there's a mirror image on the Israeli side. You ask most Israelis, of course they want peace, but the other side doesn't want it. And they have their own reasons for thinking that and their own valid reasons for thinking that. So what we have right now is mistrust. If we start on some collaborative projects, on some issues, that we can start reversing some of this discourse, some of this narrative. If we can show the Palestinians that under the right kind of circumstances, Israelis can and will take positive steps, can and will take steps that will improve the Palestinian not only quality of life, but also start a process of deoccupation. If we can show the Israelis that if they cede more control, there is a trustworthy partner on the other side, I think this allows peace activists, people who still want peace on both sides, to start confronting this narrative. If we allow things to continue the way they are right now, this really plays into the hands of those who are saying there is no solution and there is no partner on the other side. Now, all of this that I've just said is, of course, very riveting and important and relevant for all of you who will become secretaries of state, presidents, peace envoys. I suspect most of you are not going to take that path in life. So what does that mean for us? For us who are not decision makers, who are not policy makers. From my perspective, whether it is reaching peace in the ultimate sense, or even doing these small things that require, that will improve the daily life of both sides, that will improve the perception of both sides, we need dialogue. If there is one lesson that I've learned throughout my career as a negotiator, is, I guess the big surprise for me was, when I started as a negotiator, I basically thought that we had the whole truth, my side, we got it all, they were wrong, and my job was to prove to them how they were wrong. My approach initially as a negotiator was very much a polemical one. One that basically denies, is not willing to understand that there's the other side has any valid points, and my point is really to show how wrong they are. 20 years later, having dealt with this, you get to realize that both sides have very legitimate grievances, very legitimate interests, very legitimate concerns. Ones that we have learned from bitter experience, we cannot bludgeon either side into submission, and the only way to move forward is to engage, to understand, to get a sense of what are these concerns, how we can meet them, how can we get our objective, and at the same time ensuring that the other side gets enough level of comfort and enough their own objectives met, so that you have a deal, you have a situation, you have a peace that both sides feel invested in. Now, this is a lesson that as negotiators, as security officials, as people in the West Bank, in Gaza and Israel, they have learned, and they engage in it on a daily basis. It's one that unfortunately has not made its way across the ocean and has not made its way to this country. Unfortunately, from my perspective, the nature of the debate and the discourse about Palestine-Israel here, whether it's on campuses, whether it's in communities around this country, is one that is not helping either side move towards peace. It is a discourse that is basically defined as, or based on denying the other, coming from a perspective that I have the whole truth and the other side has no modicum of truth. And what we end up with is not even talking across one another, we end up shouting across one another. Many things happen when this happens. First of all, clearly there is no dialogue and no way of understanding how we can together move out of a situation that we are destined to share. What it also does, it makes a lot of people who have goodwill, who have interest in moving in resolving the conflict, make them move away from this issue. This issue has become for many people one that is unattractive, one that frankly only grief comes out of it, one that brings only the worst in the participants in this debate, and we are losing a lot of the goodwill and a lot of the energy of the general public, people who would otherwise be supportive of moving towards peace. At the end of the day, and I will conclude with this, standing there, owning the whole truth, proclaiming the whole truth, is extremely emotionally satisfying. I'm a dad, I have a son, and I play this game with him a lot, and it's satisfying to stand there and just to ride on your high horses. And for us, for many of us, who at the end of the day, after these kind of debates, go back to our comfortable apartments, whether in Cleveland, whether it's in DC, whether it's in New York, we can go home and we can talk about it over dinner to friends and family and kind of brag about how tough we were, etc. Yet, we all, from my perspective at least, ethically speaking, we have to remember that this debate is not simply a theoretical debate. It's not a debate about ideas. It is a debate that touches, at the end of the day, the real lives, the real livelihoods of real people on the ground. Every time that those of us, whether who are direct participants in the conflict there, or people who are speaking here, every time we approach it in a way that is not conducive to reaching understandings, to moving forward, every time we deepen the enmity, there is someone whose life, whose livelihood, whose dignity gets hurt, gets damaged, gets trampled on the ground. And for all of you, for all of us, I think the question we all should ask ourselves before we engage, before we speak, is what are we doing? Are we agents for positive change, or are we agents for deepening the misery of others? It's a personal decision each of us has to make for themselves. I know where I am, and I hope that everyone here in this room and outside engages in what is a very difficult conversation. At the end of the day, what you will hear, if you're a Palestinian from the Israelis, is not necessarily something that you like, and vice versa, but it's a very necessary conversation. If we don't have it, we doom others to suffer. Thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great. Okay, well, Ghaith laid out a lot here for you, and I just thought maybe I would try to fill in some of the gaps that I see. And I really just want to talk about my concern that when it's all or nothing in the Mideast, it's usually nothing. And we should try to avoid that straitjacket. And I also want to just say about what does this mean for a campus environment, what can be done, what can you do? So I hope I don't talk too long, and I look forward to the discussion. As Ghaith pointed out, I was on the John Kerry's peace team under the Obama administration. I've been involved in this issue for a long time. We were a small group in the Office of the Secretary of State, but our goal was to try to put it in baseball terms, for those of you who follow baseball, was to try to hit a home run. This was the third major effort of the United States to hit a home run on this issue. What do I mean by a home run? I mean solve all the problems. Deal with what we call the big five issues. What are going to be the borders of a two-state solution? What are the security arrangements that would undergird those borders? What would be the focus on how do you solve the refugee issue? How do you solve the issue of Jerusalem? And does each side accept the character of the other side's state, mutual recognition? Those were the big five. Bill Clinton tried this in the year 2000, the last 6 months. Camp David was on the Palestinian negotiating team. Condoleezza Rice, when she was Secretary of State, did a kickoff conference in Annapolis, 2007. A lot of follow-on talks in 2008. And then the effort that I was involved on with the Kerry team was 2013 and 14. And we wanted, we thought if we couldn't do it the front door, we would try the side door, the back door, the window, the basement, even the chimney. We didn't want someone to write a postdoctoral appraisal at Case Western University or any other university that said, well, the American team wasn't creative enough. This was the heaviest investment the United States had put into actually resolving the core of the conflict. And so these were three major efforts. I think that they were all noble efforts. I can tell you that I feel we were close with conceptual breakthroughs on 2 of the 5 issues. I think on the issues of the borders, Netanyahu understood more than he lets on in terms of his own coalition, what was needed to be done. Abbas also understood the refugees weren't going back. They go to the state of Palestine, and there was no disagreement. Nobody wanted a single Palestinian refugee to live in squalor. That was not contested. The issue was, could they go to 2 countries?